r/ask Reddit. Which paradox just mind ducks a person? The UK triple lock that people moving to the UK experience. Needs proof of address and photographic ID to open a bank account. Need a bank account and photographic ID to rent a place. Need a bank account and an address to get sent your photographic ID. Checkmate atheists. Surely you don't need a bank account to get an ID. Yeah, that part doesn't make any sense. The ship of Theseus always kind of ducked me. So, there's this Greek dude called Theseus, and he's on a very long boat trip home. His ship needs repair. They stop, replace a few rotten boards, and continue. Due to the particularly strenuous nature of this very long trip, several more of these stops for repairs are made, until, by the very end, not a single board from the original vessel remains. Is this still the same vessel? If not, when did it cease to be? Douglas Adams once shared an anecdote of this concept in practice. I remembered once, in Japan, having been to see the Gold Pavilion Temple in Kyoto and being mildly surprised at quite how well it had weathered the passage of time since it was first built in the 14th century. I was told it hadn't weathered well at all, and had in fact been burned to the ground twice in this century. So it isn't the original building? I had asked my Japanese guide, but yes, of course it is. He insisted, rather surprised at my question. But it's burnt down? Yes, twice, many times, and rebuilt, of course. It is an important and historic building, with completely new materials, but of course, it was burnt down. So how can it be the same building? It is always the same building. I had to admit to myself that this was in fact a perfectly rational point of view. It merely started from an unexpected premise. The idea of the building, the intention of it, its design, are all immutable and are the essence of the building. The intention of the original builders is what survives. The wood of which the design is constructed decays and is replaced when necessary. To be overly concerned with the original materials, which are merely sentimental souvenirs of the past, is to fail to see the living building itself. For me, it's a very interesting example of how different cultures interpret the idea of continuity. For example, there is a shrine complex in Japan called Ice Shrine, which is the most sacred locations in Shinto. Every 20 years, the two main buildings are dismantled and rebuilt, by hand, by hundreds of volunteers. This ritual is based on the idea of impermanence, death and renewal in Shinto, but it's also done to keep the skills of constructing the shrine alive throughout the generations. The same is done in many shrines and temples throughout the country. This is interesting to me because you could argue that the cycle of destruction and renewal with new materials is precisely what gives it its continuity. Edit. Bloody hell. Thanks for the awards, guys. Glad you enjoyed it. This was a raging issue in the field of historical preservation. In the Western world, we basically settled on the original material and construction is what counts. Frustrates the hell out of me for the buildings which were adulterated from the original designs and we could now build to the designer's original vision. Edit. And I am absolutely loving the raging discussion below this comment. Shows how both sides have really good arguments. Brace paradox from Wiki. The observation that adding one or more roads to a road network can end up impeding overall traffic flow through it. The paradox was postulated in 1968 by German mathematician Dietrich Brace, who noticed that adding a road to a particular congested road traffic network would increase overall journey time. Very evident in cities, skylines. The bane of my cities in that game. The more roads, the more traffic. So I know this is just a silly thing, but at my old work, my department was food service. In our prep room, you had to always wear an apron. Always. No exceptions. When leaving the prep room, you had to take your apron off to prevent cross-contamination. The bosses were trying to figure out where to put the hooks. Inside in the back of the door, or outside on the wall. Edit. Always proofread before posting. Feels like there should have been an anteroom between prep room and the larger room with apron hooks. That is part of a real solution. The other is to use disposable aprons and throw them out as you exit and put on a new one after a thorough hand washing in the antechamber. The aprons would be just inside the prep room or at the end of the antechamber. Edit 2. Prior to edit 1 what? Yay. Biodegradable plant cellulose aprons. Stop beaching at me. Edit. My most rapidly upvoted comment about antechambers. Do not ever change. Reddit, open bracket. It was at 545 upvotes while only 47 minutes old. That this page is intentionally left blank page. The page isn't even blank anymore. I actually saw one in a textbook before that said this page intentionally no longer blank. My favorite phrase that got published in an advanced math book, in case there is danger of no confusion. Fry becoming his own grandpa. He did do the nasty in the past nastification. The Boltzmann brain. The idea goes something like this. In any system, there is a tendency for entropy to increase, which is another way of saying that everything tends to spread out. In a room full of gas, the gas fills the room. It does not pack itself in a corner. However, because of the weirdness of quantum fluctuations, it is possible for particles to just spontaneously arrange themselves into more complex configurations. It might take trillions and trillions of years, but if you watched that room full of gas long enough, sooner or later you would see all of the gas pack itself into one corner before spreading out again. Or, you might see the gas arrange itself into a fully functioning human brain, complete with false memories, senses, and a brief spark of consciousness. Of course, entropy would quickly take over again. The brain would dissolve back into gas almost immediately. This is also hideously unlikely. But over an infinite time the laws of physics tell us this is not just likely, it is inevitable. So which are you, human or Boltzmann brain, enjoying the briefest moment of your fictional life before you dissolve back into space dust? Edit. While this blew up, glad I was able to share the existential dread of Boltzmann brains with everyone. A few follow-up points. True, this is not really a paradox, mostly just a mind duck. Something I left out of the original post to keep it simple. A Boltzmann brain universe, i.e., one briefly conscious brain, is arguably much simpler than the impossibly vast universe we think, we observe. Perhaps it is actually much more likely that you are Boltzmann brain than the human you imagine yourself to be. I'm not a physicist. Hopefully I did a decent job of introducing the concept and answering some follow-up questions. But you might check out the Wikipedia entry or the PBS Spacetime episode on the concept to get a deeper understanding. Although philosophically similar to the idea that we're all just the extremely unlikely product of random chance, the Boltzmann brain concept says something physically quite specific and distinct. That there is no universe, you are the only thing that exists, and only for a moment, and that by a certain interpretation, the laws of physics say this is likely. On the other hand, yes, this is exactly like the DVD logo hitting the corner of the screen. There's a joke I heard on this. Dr. Humdinger visits the same ice cream shop every day. He sits at the counter and orders 2 ice cream sundaes, one for him, and one at the empty seat beside him. Every day, he finishes his ice cream and leaves the other. He pays for both and leaves after a week of this. The owner asks about this. The doctor explains, I'm a theoretical physicist. It is theoretically possible for the matter above this stool to spontaneously coalesce into a suitable mate. I want there to be ice cream ready for them. The owner replies, well, okay, but there are plenty of people in this shop every day. Why don't you strike up conversations? Maybe you'll find a suitable mate among them. Sure, but what are the odds of that? That joke was used on The Big Bang Theory. The physicists found it insulting. One of my favorites is Zeno's paradox. In order to leave my apartment, just for example, I have to walk halfway to my front door. Then I have to walk half the remaining distance. Then half that distance. Ad infinitum. In theory, I should never be able to reach the door. Now I love this paradox, because we've actually solved it. It was a lively, well-discussed debate for millennia. At least a few early thinkers were convinced that motion was an illusion because of it. It was so persuasive an argument that people doubted their senses. Then Leibniz, and/or Newton, developed calculus and we realized that infinite sums can have finite solutions. Paradox resolved. It makes me wonder what calculus we are missing to resolve some of these others. Edit. A lot more people have strong opinions about Zeno's paradox than I thought. To address common comments: 1. Yes, it's Zeno, not Zeno. Blame autocorrect and my own fraught relationship with homophones. 2. Yes, there are 3 of them. 3. If you're getting hung up on the walking example. Think of an arrow being shot at a fleeing target. First the arrow has to get to where the target was, but at that point, the target has moved, so the arrow has to cover that new distance, but by then, the target has moved again, etc. So the arrow gets infinitesimally closer to the target, but doesn't ever reach it. 4. Okay, you think you could have solved it if you were living in ancient Greece. I profoundly regret that you weren't born back then to catapult our understanding 2 millennia into the future. 5. Yes, I agree Diogenes was a badass. I hope this covers everything. Reminds me of a joke. An engineer, a physicist, and a mathematician are at a bar and see a beautiful woman across the room. They're all too nervous to talk to her, so the physicist devises a plan to work up the necessary courage. Walk half the distance from them to her, then half the remaining distance, and again, and again, and again. The mathematician says it won't work because they will never actually get to her. The engineer says, well, it's close enough for practical purposes. An infinite number of mathematicians walk into a bar. The first orders a drink. The second orders half a drink. The third orders a quarter of a drink. The fourth orders an eighth of a drink. The bartender pours 2 drinks and says, you guys really ought to know your limits. Jim is my enemy, but it turns out that Jim is also his own worst enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, Jim is actually my friend, but, because he is his own worst enemy, the enemy of my friend is my enemy. So, actually Jim is my enemy, but, I see. Well, Jim needs to learn self-love then lol. He also needs to learn that identity theft is not a joke. Pinocchio says my nose will grow after I finish this sentence, does it? Depends on if lying is a necessary condition for growth or merely a sufficient one. I frequently see Pinocchio resolved based on the intent of the speaker to tell the truth or lie. Otherwise, his curse can be used to learn absolute truths you have no other way of proving. It could even speculate about future events if X will do Y is considered a true or false statement. It could even speculate about future events if X will do Y is considered a true or false statement. It's probably not the original intent, but this interpretation is so much cooler. I'm gonna ask Pinocchio questions about all the conspiracy theories I've ever heard to find out if they're real or not. The Banach-Tarski paradox is one hell of a mind duck. It's basically taking something and rearranging it to form another exact copy of itself while still having the complete original. Like taking a sphere, which has infinite points on it, and drawing line from every point on its surface to the center, or the core of the sphere. Then you separate the lines from the sphere, but because there is infinite points you now have an exact copy of the original sphere. It's kind of hard to explain here, so just watch the Vsauce video on it for a more in-depth explanation. One anagram of Banach-Tarski that I like is Banach-Tarski Banach-Tarski RLSO. Thanks Beresi. Came here to say this. Really it's less Mindaki because real objects are made up of discrete and finite particles, whereas the theory is based on the axiom of choice and infinite mathematical points. But the idea is whack. The bootleg paradox. The main example is Beethoven, so I'll use him. If you were to go back in time, you would see Beethoven. But when you get there, you cannot find Beethoven anywhere. But you have all of his music sheets. So you create all of Beethoven's music, so technically, you are Beethoven. Now the real question is, where did the music come from? And how did the name Beethoven come to be? Edit. There. I put in periods edit too. If you could go back in time. Isn't that bootstrap? Yes. The Bootstrap Paradox. It's named for a 1941 novella by Robert Heinlein, writing under the pen name Anson MacDonald. Excellent story. Psychology. Psychology is defined as the study of the human brain. That would mean that the human brain is teaching, studying, and learning from itself all at the same time. In a sense, the brain is the teacher, the textbook, and the student at the same time. If the brain was so simple we could fully understand it, we'd be so simple that we couldn't. Congratulations, you've discovered biology. Cole's law. Very simple. Some love it, but I can't stand it. Very common. 2. What is Cole's law? Cabbage, mayo, vinegar, and some other stuff. The coastline paradox. The more accurately you measure a coastline, the longer it gets, to infinity. I have 2 comments questions. It couldn't possibly be to infinity, right? Even if you measure every grain of sand, the coastline will significantly grow, but it is still finite. You can't measure a coastline perfectly accurately because it's not static. Tides and water levels are always changing. I think the coastline part is just an example of something tangible with fractal-like qualities to make the concept more understandable. It might help to think of measuring the perimeter of the famous Mandelbrot fractal set in all its infinite detail. The area of the set is clearly bounded and finite, but the perimeter is not. Doesn't it really come down to how often the predictor is correct? If it's 99% of the time, then you should 1 box. But as his accuracy drops, the expected value of 2 boxing increases until it eventually surpasses 1 boxing. Right. But the paradox is that the accuracy doesn't really matter because when it's time to actually make the choice, the money is already in the box. No matter what. Picking the 2 box option gives you an extra $100. So how can it have a lower expected value? The predictor can't go back in time and put more money in the box based on your choice. It's less of a paradox and more of a mind game. But since the predictor can only make decisions based on your past, the only way to win is to live your life truly believing that 1 box is the correct answer, and then change your mind to 2 box when the decision time comes. Which, obviously, you can't choose to do. Can a man drown in the fountain of eternal life? Yes, the fountain only prevented aging. Drink the fountain and get beheaded, you dead. What about the fountain of invincibility and immortality? The Infinite Hotel one is not exactly a paradox, but still a minduck. A hotel has an infinite number of rooms and can accommodate an infinite number of guests, 1 per room. A traveler walks up to the front desk and inquires about a room. Sadly, it's Infinity Day and an infinite number of people are in town celebrating, so every one of the rooms is full. However, the clever desk clerk realizes he can still fit a traveler in by asking everyone to move into the room number that's 1 higher than theirs. So the person in room 1 moves to room 2, room 2 moves to room 3, etc. Now room 1 is free for the traveler. However, just as the traveler has been accommodated, an infinite busload of people arrives looking for rooms. The hotel is surely full now, right? Nope. The clerk realizes he can ask everyone to move into a room that's twice the room number of their own. So room 1 moves to room 2, room 2 moves to room 4, room 3 moves to room 6, etc. Now all the odd numbered rooms are empty and can be filled with the new guests. So in a sense, an infinitely full hotel is still infinitely empty. I hope the clever desk clerk knows how to efficiently deal with infinite complaints. Infinite clerks. Paradox Interactive, every time they release a new DLC, everyone loses their damn minds. Stellaris has entered the chat. Takes experience to get most decent jobs. But how do you get a good job without experience? Work a shitty job. My local supermarket in the application said that I needed 1 year retail experience. The unexpected hanging paradox. A prisoner is sentenced to death, and he is told that he will be hanged on a day next week, and on the day he won't be expecting it. The prisoner thinks to himself, well, if they hang me on Saturday, then I will expect it because there is no other possible day, so it won't be on Saturday. Then he realizes, well, it won't be Friday either, because I know that if I make it to Friday, they won't hang me on Saturday, so it has to be Friday, which means that they won't hang him on a Friday. He realizes this logic would continue for each day of the week, and so he concludes that there is no possible day for them to hang him unexpectedly, so he thinks they must not plan to hang him. On Wednesday they hang him, and he is completely surprised. The more you think about this paradox, the less sense it makes. I think I got this one figured out. The prisoner's logic was sound, until the very end. If he had continued reasoning, he would have known that any day he is executed is a surprise. Even Friday, since it cannot be Friday per his originally reasoning. Friday will be a surprise. Friday was the name of the horse. The universe either has to be infinite or we're in a box. However, if you ever reach the end, that closes the universe in. It would be impossible for something to not be on the other side of the enclosure, at least to us, since nothingness doesn't really exist in human perception. Those aren't the only options. Imagine space that loops. If you go a certain distance, You reach your starting point again. Walking on a sphere is like this. You're on a 2D surface with no boundaries, yet it's finite. It loops around. How anything began. Whether you believe in creationism or the Big Bang, etc. Where did the beginning come from? God had to have started at some point. Those atoms that exploded into the universe had to come from somewhere. Where the duck did anything come from? A long time ago actually. Never. And also now. Nothing is nowhere. When? Never. Makes sense. Right? Like I said, it didn't happen. Nothing was never anywhere. That's why it's been everywhere. It's been so everywhere. You don't need a where. You don't even need a when. That's how every it gets. Forget this. I wanna be something. Go somewhere. Do something. I want things to change. I want to invent time and space. And I know it's possible because everything is here. And it probably already happened. I just don't know when to start. And that's exactly where it started. Whoa. You made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.